Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas, and graphics are the first and foremost thing people think about whenever they see a brand new video game. Think about it logically. You see a new game, you judge it by the graphics, and it's been this way for 20, 25, 30 years, ever since the dawn of, I would say, 3D games. And I think over the course of those 30 years or so, there have been a handful of games that really push the boundaries of how good a game can actually look. And some are genuinely impressive for their time. And what I want to talk about today is 5 specific games that I think are graphically impressive for their time. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are still graphically impressive today. It just means that in that day and age, they were absolutely fantastic and pushed the boundaries of the hardware as well as the general industry. These games I'm going to talk about are in no particular order. They're just in this pile that I've selected right here. And the first one I want to talk about is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, specifically Rebirth, but it does also include the original Final Fantasy VII as well as the Final Fantasy VII Remake, the first part of this trilogy. Now, I want to go with this one because this one genuinely did push the boundaries of what a game can look like. And when this was first shown off, it looked absolutely amazing. Going forward a little bit further with this one and going into the realms of the PS5 Pro, it made it look even better. Now, if you have played this game on the PS5, base PS5, and also on the PS5 Pro, you will know that there is a graphical difference between the two. So the PS5 Pro version is kind of the one I want to talk about in this video, because that is the one that truly pushed this game further and further. But that's not to say that the original version of this wasn't impressive, because let's face it, it was. Squaresoft has always been at the very edge of pushing the boundaries further and further with their Final Fantasy games. If you look at something like Final Fantasy 13, that was graphically impressive as well. Even the original 7 for its time, 8, 9, 10, they're all absolutely gorgeous. And I know graphics aren't everything in a game, but let's face it, Final Fantasy generally is a very, very good looking game series. The next one I'm going to talk about, I think, does still hold up a little bit today, although it has seen remasters over the years. That is BioShock. Now, this came out in 2007, I believe. So this was kind of in the middle of where video games were becoming these 3D cool looking poly models to actually really impressive looking games. And I would argue that this is one of the first impressive looking games of the 3D fully modeled environment era of video games. That was a mouthful, wasn't it? But this itself, if you ever played the original BioShock, not the remaster, the original BioShock on PS3, Xbox 360, you'll know just how awesome these games actually looked for their time. You've got to think, way back when, we didn't really have HD TVs, 4K didn't exist back then. And you got to look at the Xbox 360, that came with AV cables. So if you were playing this on like a 480p display, it looked absolutely fantastic, because even on a 1080p display, it looks unbelievable. And it was the atmosphere, it was just the ambience of the entire game that truly made BioShock feel just above the rest in terms of its graphical impressiveness. And like I say, even to this day, I played this a couple of months ago, this actual version, and it still holds up. Genuinely, I still think this holds up. Obviously not as good as the remasters, but what an impressive looking game. The next one I'm going to talk about, we're going back even further in time to the beginning of this millennium. And that is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. And I know this has had a remake on the 3DS, and let's face it, if you've played that, that looks absolutely gorgeous. But keep in mind, this came out at the turn of the millennium. This came out in, I think, year 2000. It might have been 2001 here in the UK. I can't quite remember, but either way, it's about 25 years old. And this game, for back then, looks unbelievable. The cartridge itself is very heavy, and I know that sounds really weird to say because of the extra stuff that's in there. You also need the expansion pack, the little red thing that goes into your Nintendo 64. So that requires N64 expansion pack. And that was because that gave it a little bit more memory to really push the boundaries of what the N64 could do. And in terms of how this looked compared to Ocarina of Time was a great looking game. There's no doubt about that. But Majora's Mask looks even better. Now, one thing I will say about Majora's Mask is there is fog to an extent, but I think that fog is what also adds to the atmosphere of Majora's Mask. I mean, what a fantastic looking game. Yes, I know itself is rather small. It's not a big Zelda. It was made in about 18 months, I think. But overall, how this pushed the boundaries of the graphics for the N64, it looked better than some PlayStation games. It genuinely did. And we all know that the PlayStation could produce better looking games than the N64. But at the same time, you know, the N64, if done right, could make better games than the PlayStation. Some PlayStation games, I'm not going into all that. But for the era that this came out in, Majora's Mask looked gorgeous. It really, really did. The next one I'm going to talk about has had re-release after remake after remaster after re-release. And if you know what I mean there, you'll know it's The Last of Us. And I want to specifically talk about the original Last of Us on the PlayStation 3. I don't want to talk about the PS4 version. I don't want to talk about the PS5 version. I don't want to talk about The Last of Us Part 2. This game itself pushed the PS3 to its absolute limits. I would argue that this is the best looking PS3 game. And what I find amazing is that one of the early PS3 games is in this list, and one of the last PS3 games is in this list. Both BioShock and The Last of Us pushed the PS3 to different types of limits. If you think about it though, if BioShock was made in 2013 when this came out, could you imagine what that would have looked like? It would have looked even better. And I think that's what the devs at Naughty Dog knew. They knew the Sony hardware. They knew how to push it further and further. I'm not a massive lover of the Uncharted games, but I know they're graphically impressive and they look fantastic. They truly do. But The Last of Us is what pushed the PS3. And if you have played this version, not the remastered versions, on your PS3 natively, you'll know that, wow, this looks gorgeous. Everything about the game, the atmosphere, just absolutely fantastic. And I would argue that in the early days of the PlayStation 3, developing something like The Last of Us would not have been possible. Just not possible. It's not that the hardware got better, it was more that the devs gained the experience. And I think that's what counts in making a video game look visually stunning. It's the experience from the developers of any console cycle. For example, if you look at the early games of the PS4 to the later games of the PS4, you can see just how well they are optimized visually, everything. And it's the same with any console cycle, really. Again, with Majora's Mask, you can see that cycle happening with a Nintendo 64. But The Last of Us, what a fantastic looking game. The last one I want to talk about is one that I'm pretty sure you probably know I'm going to talk about. And I could talk about many games in this series, but there is one specific game that I want to focus on more than anything. Resident Evil. This is the Resident Evil remake. And if you played the original Resident Evil from 1996, you'll know that that looked cheesy. It was a good game. I absolutely adore it. And if you put that into perspective now, it doesn't hold up, I don't think, but this does. 25 years later, this holds up. This still looks fantastic, even on GameCube today. I know there's been re-release versions and different versions of this on different consoles, but this original GameCube version looks stunning even today. And what I think is the reason behind this is because Shinji Mikami, the original creator of Resident Evil, had a vision. And his vision was hindered by the fact that the original Resident Evil was on the PlayStation, a 32-bit console. Yes, I know we got the Nintendo 64, and we all know about Resident Evil 0. If you don't, go and research it. It's a very interesting thing. But when they started making Resident Evil 0 and realized that, oh, actually, we can't have it on the N64, we've got to put it on the GameCube, they came to the realization that, wow, the GameCube is actually quite impressive of what it can do. Why don't we try remaking my original vision of Resident Evil? And that's exactly what happened. And holy crap, for this day and age when this came out, it's simply the best looking game ever created at that point. Like, seriously, it just looked absolutely gorgeous. And honestly, I would even say that this looked better than Resident Evil 4 when it came out like 20 years ago. Seriously. And I know I said that I could include almost any Resident Evil in this, and it is true, because look at the Resident Evil 2, 3, 4 remakes. They look fantastic. Look at, I don't know, Resident Evil Village, just absolutely stunning. But it's this that I wanted to highlight more than anything, like I say, because for its time, this looked years ahead of where it was graphically, because it looked fantastic, no doubt about that. And honestly, it's one of my favourite games of all time. I love Resident Evil series, but I love this remake. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And if you ever get a chance to play this version in the modern day, try it and you'll see exactly what I mean, how good it still holds up. So those were 5 games that I genuinely feel were impressive graphically for their time. And I know there are many more, and I don't want to go into them too much because I'd be here all day. This video will go on for hours and hours and hours. So this was like a short whistle-stop tour of the 5 games that I feel are truly worth recognizing as graphically impressive games for their time. Please do let me know in the comments any games you think are graphically impressive for their time, whether it is a brand new game or whether it's a game from 30 years ago, because it's good to open people's eyes to games like this and give them the opportunity to play it. There'll also be some videos hanging around on the screen if you wouldn't mind clicking any of those and having a watch of some of my other stuff, because I make quite a lot of videos. There's also a little subscribe button just down below if you fancy clicking that and watching the next video that comes up in your feed from me. But if not, that's okay. I'm not going to force you, but I do appreciate you watching this far. So thank you very much for watching. Take care.